boys and girls. So today we are going to get to learn a little bit more about the Department of Agriculture. And if you remember, we talked about the Department of Education and how important it is because it helps our country to come up with plans to ensure that every single one of you gets a great education and is able to, succeed as you continue on in life, which is awesome. And, they have a really big job. And we are going to learn about the Department of Agriculture. And if you remember yesterday, I talked about how agriculture is all kinds of food production. It is, our crop farming, it's our dairy farms, it's our, all kinds of farms and how we get our food. We even talked about things like shellfish and lobster yesterday, things that you don't necessarily think about when you're eating it. Where does this come from? So we are going to read this article together, and I'm going to kind of mark up some parts of it. Just remember, like we did with the Department of Education, it is not necessary for you to come up with markups. I'm just going to have you answer the discussion question. But as we read this, I'm just going to kind of talk about it a little bit. So the Department of Agriculture, this is a photograph of a farm. So you all, if you remember us learning about farms in rural communities, so that is where that is located. The United States Department of Agriculture was one of the first departments to be created by the federal government. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the law that created this department. When he later spoke with Congress, he called it the People's Department. Why do you think he called it the People's Department? So go ahead and think about that. I'm going to highlight. There we go, this sentence right here. So why do you think he called it the People's Department? And I'm going to, if I'm thinking about it, think about, well, okay, agriculture is important. Why is it important? So think about that. Why is agriculture important? Go ahead and tell me, tell the computer screen, tell your dog, tell your cat, tell your stuffed animal, tell your mom. Go ahead and tell someone why agriculture is important. Go. So, agriculture is important because it feeds everyone. Without farming and agriculture, we would not have our food supply. So think about that. This is my thought, and we're going to find out why Abraham Lincoln called it that. But think about why he called it the People's Department. My thought is agriculture is really important. It affects every single person. It affects you. It affects me. It affects Mr. Isselman. It affects Miss Seeberger. It affects your cousin. It affects everybody, because without it, we wouldn't have our food supply. So let's see if that's correct. He believed that agriculture was an important part of American people's lives. They were the ones involved in the day-to-day farming activities. Also, agriculture had been a major part of the United States economy since the country's beginning. After all, everyone needed to eat food, and that food came from the country's farms. So it kind of did have to do with what I had said, not entirely, but the people of America, they were the ones that are farming, and they are still the ones who farm. We definitely get food from other countries, but our fresh foods we're able to get from the United States, from different states sometimes, but from the United States, which is awesome that American people are able to do this. And the economy, I'm going to highlight that right here. So just a reminder, do you remember what economy is? We talked a little bit about it. So our economy is the money and financial situation of the U.S. So basically, it's, our money, it's how we're doing financially. It is, things, are we doing great? Are we doing not so great? And our economy has to do with a whole lot of things. But one of the things it has to do with is agriculture, because we're able to trade our crops, sell our crops, do things with our crops to either get money or to get other resources. So that's pretty awesome. And it talks about the country's beginning. Well, in the country's very beginning, lots of people who came here were farmers because, like it says, everyone needed to eat food. That food had to come from the country's farms. If you weren't able to farm, what were you going to eat? There were no stores here. Have you ever been to or worked on a farm? Yes, no, maybe so. If so, you may know that it can be complicated to farm well. Many different things can go wrong on the farm. If farmers are not careful over the years, the soil on their land can lose important nutrients. This makes it harder for crops to grow. Farmers also worry that the chemicals they use to help crops grow will get washed into the local rivers and lakes. These chemicals make the water unsafe for drinking. So some of the things that farmers actually have to do, where it talks about here, where if they are not careful over the years, the soil on their land can lose important nutrients. So I know, I'm making a connection here, sometimes farmers plant different crops in different sections of their land to give the soil a break. Sometimes they also need to stop planting in a spot to let the soil, I'm going to say, rest. So I just know that that is a fact that I know. So sometimes, for example, you might plant strawberries in this section for a few years, and then you might take a break and plant blueberries in that section of land for a few years, and you kind of trade off to give it a break. And I know that sometimes also they just stop planting in a spot to let the soil rest. Now here, is that my comment? Sorry about that. This makes it harder for crops to grow. Farmers also worry that the chemicals they use to help crops grow will get washed into the local rivers and lakes. So I do know that there are laws. I'm not going, well, I guess I'll make a markup here. And I know that there are laws that measure the quality of the water and figure out if farmers need to change something. So basically what people do is they'll actually go and they'll measure the water because think about it. Do you want to drink water with chemicals? I know I don't. So they'll go and test the water near where the farmers are growing things, and if it has a lot of chemicals in, they'll make them change something so they can fix that. This is the seal of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So it says agriculture is the foundation of manufacture and commerce. Basically, that's saying that's where the economy works. That's what makes our country function. Has some, looks like hay or corn there, and a plow. The Department of Agriculture has given tips to farmers. They want to make sure that American farmers will be able to grow many crops. They also want to make sure that farmers don't hurt the local environment. The Department of Agriculture also cares about conserving natural resources or materials from nature. One of the natural resources that the Department of Agriculture works to conserve is water. Farmers use a lot of water when they farm. The Department of Agriculture tries to help farmers save more water. So think about this. They want to make sure they don't hurt the local government, which we talked about could involve things like the water. But think about it, even animals and things like that. You don't want them to be eating chemicals or anything like that. So they need to make sure that that's okay. Also, natural resources, and I'm going to highlight this. They use a lot of water. And think about it. Why do they need to use a lot of water? So go ahead and think. Need to use water because why? Right. Their crops need water, right? And even if they have animals instead of things like, corn and things like that, think about it, their animals need to drink water. So they use a lot of water. So they have to try to help farmers save more water. And there's lots of different ways that they do that, but that's part of their job. So now the question that it ends with is, can you think of other natural resources used in farming? So remember, let's go up here. It says natural resources are materials from nature. So think about what other natural resources they might use. I'll give some examples. Think about soil. We actually talked about that. We talked about how up here, how soil can lose important nutrients. Well, that's part of our earth, right? Um, and even things like they can use things like the wind or the sun to help make things happen on their farms, which is awesome. It's awesome that we've come this far. The air, think about the air. We don't necessarily think about that all the time, but they need to protect that. They need to make sure that they don't pollute the air and that they use the air properly. And like I said, they may use things like the wind, a wind turbine, which can produce energy that can, help them milk cows or help them power their grain bins to dry their wheat, things like that. So those are some other natural resources used in farming. Um, so basically, we learned about the Department of Agriculture today, and we were able to learn about some of the awesome things that the Department of Agriculture does, and just some of the important things that you may not think about when you think about farming. Um, but that are very interesting. So your writing for the day, your discussion prompt for the day is simply tell me two things that you learned from this article. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the Department of Agriculture. It can also just be about farming, because I know that this kind of was a combination. It talked about the Department of Agriculture. It also talked about farming. So just tell me two things that you learned from this article. What are two things that you learned about what the Department of Agriculture does, or what farming, what some of the things that farmers do, any two things that you learned from this. So I am really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and I hope that you enjoyed getting to learn about the Department of Agriculture. It is a really important department that we would not be the same without. So tomorrow we are going to get to go on a virtual field trip to someone famous, his house and his farm, and we're going to get to talk a little bit more about what he did. So I'm really excited to do that with you. All right, third grade, I had a lot of fun. I hope that you did as well, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.